And the cyber risks are digital crimes, cyber crimes, everything from cyber attacks to cyber theft. You have some LP organizations for which this department falls in their world. You have most of the organizations where this is a separate department, part of the IT, but there's a strong partnership between the two worlds, et cetera. You've got server risk, and you've got e-commerce as a beast unto itself. Most retailers today sell not just at a traditional retail store, but this is why we struggle to say what we do. So why is the public-private partnership so important? I talked a little bit about this. Now we're going to focus in on crime itself. This is an analysis, and the data is from the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, which is published through the FBI. You can go to fbi.gov and pull it up. And what I did was, the analysis is mine, and I want to make that distinction because I'm not saying this is what the FBI is saying. The analysis is mine, the data is theirs. But what I did was I charted crime in America from as far back as I could go, which was 1960, and then accelerated it to today, which is 2010. And what I did was, for the purposes of this slide, I charted property crime, larceny theft, burglary rate, violent crime rate, murder rate. And I looked at it over a period of time. And what immediately should start to stand out, and I'll highlight this better, is how similar these curves are. The rate may change, but how similar these curves are over time. There's some variation, but generally speaking, they start to climb through the 60s, climb through the 70s with some dips. They almost all reach some sort of a peak or a plateau in late 80s, early 90s. And then they start to come down. Back to my life at the district attorney's office. If you recall, I said that I started at the district attorney's office when I was in college, late 80s, early 90s. What I didn't appreciate at the time was that the new crime methodology that was being applied in New York, the logic that said, what we're going to do is we're going to focus in on small crimes. We're going to focus on all crimes. We're going to require people who are arrested in crimes to go downtown, which was burdening us. 5 years from the point that that was instituted, crime in New York dropped, all crime dropped by 58%. 58%. Murders in 2009, at the peak of the murder rate in New York City, were 2,100 murders a year. By 5 years later, it was a little over 700. Crime in general, violent crimes were roughly 700,000, a little bit over 700,000 a year. 5 years later, it's 300,000. That's significant delta from the previous years. What was interesting is crime in America, as you can see, was also seeing a decline. The rate in some cities were bigger. The policing tactics were changing. I had witnessed it firsthand, not appreciating it at the time. I'm going to talk about some of that as we close out today. In our industry, we have one person who does a lot of shrink analysis, who looks at shortage and has been looking at shortage for an extended period of time. And this, I realize you can't see it, so I'll give you the data, but this study has been existed. It's done by Dr. Hollinger, Dr. Dick Hollinger, Richard Hollinger, out of the University of Florida. And he's been measuring shrink, getting that data from retailers. And he's been looking at it since 1991. Guess which years had the highest shrink in our industry? Late 80s, early 90s. If you look at the Hollinger report, sorry, I didn't mean to jump. These years, which is, this is 1992, where the shrink is at 1.91, 1993, where it drops to 1.88, and then it jumps to its peak in 1994, 1.95. And then you watch it slowly decline, bleep, and decline. But if I charted this using the same methodology I charted the other crimes, the chart would look quite similar. I then went a little further. I took property crime and charted it specifically against violent crime. Two different categories. Violent crime, according to Uniform Crime Report, is crimes that are murder. It includes murder. It includes rape, and includes aggravated assault and robbery. Okay? Property crime includes larceny, includes grand theft auto. I'm drawing a blank, but there's a couple of others. So what I did was I charted this, and I played with this and had some of the people I know who are better at statisticians at this, and tried to build what's called a correlation between these two variables, violent crime versus property crime. And I'm not going to get into the statistics of it, but let me walk you through what it means. So essentially, there's an 80% relationship, 80% correlation between these two variables. So Suni, what does that mean? Let me explain. That means that if I told you what the violent crime rate was in a given year, 80% of the time you could predict what the property crime rate is. Inverted, if I told you what the property crime rate was in a given year, 80% of the time you could predict what the violent crime rate is. One of the more common questions we get all the time is, well, obviously the most important thing, I even have this conversation with my family, is that law enforcement focuses in on violent crime. And obviously that's the more important of the two. But what's intriguing here is that both crimes correlate to one another. So ignoring one doesn't get you a stronger benefit on the other. Also went one step further and played with this a little bit more. Now I've plotted property crime against just murders. Look at the charts. I mean, that's pretty close. You just look at the chart. So crimes against property, very close to crimes against murder. Check my numbers. Doubt me. I had some people check it. This is from the FBI's report. So you're probably asking yourself, so why is there such a strong correlation between two things that you would generally think shouldn't be related? Well, there's a great phrase that says, today's larceny is tomorrow's assault. Tomorrow's assault is next week's murder, which is kind of the thought process. Crime builds on itself. And when you allow petty crimes to happen, eventually you end up with more serious crime over time. There's a study. How many people have heard of the broken window theory? We got a good amount that know it, good amount don't. So good, let's have a discussion. So broken window theory starts in 1969. A scientist by the name of Dr. Philip Zimbardo said, I'm going to take two cars. I'm going to put one in Palo Alto, California. I'm going to put one in Bronx, New York. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift the hood of the car. I'm going to take the plates off. And I'm going to make the car appear abandoned and see what happens. Well, Bronx being where I'm from, New York, that car was cleaned up in about 2 hours. Stripped clean, everything gone. Palo Alto, California, which for those of you guys who don't know is a more affluent part of California, not too far from Stanford University. That car stayed untouched for 2 weeks. He then did the same experiment, only this time he broke the window in both cars. Broke the window, hit with a sledgehammer. Again, the Bronx lived up to expectations. We cleaned it out. By the way, I lived in the Bronx for 10 years, so I can get away with saying this. Palo Alto, California, that car got cleaned out in the exact same rate once the window was broken. All of a sudden, it didn't matter. And his argument was that once you broke the window, it signified to that community that that car had been abandoned and nobody cared for it. And when nobody cared for it, it became fair game in any community. The difference in the Bronx was, if you leave your car with the hood up and take the plates off, they don't need it to be broken for them to know it's been abandoned. In Palo Alto, the breaking of the window was just enough to tip the scale. But the problem was the same in both communities. It didn't matter the socioeconomics of the community. That theory gets adopted in 1982 by two gentlemen from Harvard University. And this is actually the article that Giuliani references when he brings the quality of life crimes into New York. They write an article in the Atlantic Journal in 1982. The two gentlemen are Wilson and Keeling from Harvard University, and they write about this phenomena of warehouses. If you leave a warehouse abandoned for a period of time, generally you'll have no broken windows. The moment the first window gets broken in a warehouse, what happens? All of a sudden, it doesn't take long for all the windows. And they then went back to, and again, it doesn't matter what community you're talking about, and they then went back to the study that had been done in 1969 and say, what can we learn from this in the application of crime? And what they essentially purported in the article and talked through was the notion that if you ignore small deviant behavior, small criminal behavior, over time in any community, you will start to see an increase in that behavior. And that increase generally is exponential. So when that first window gets broken, the rate of the next one gets broken goes up. But then the rate keeps accelerating. It's not a linear relationship, it's an exponential one. So, you know, when I got asked to speak today, one of the things that, you know, I was asked to talk about when I talked to Kent and the group from LAPD was, well, you know, a lot of people aren't, you know, don't know what loss prevention is, so I said I'd talk a little bit about that. Wanted to draw a correlation between why property crime is an important crime not to be ignored and compare it to criminal crime. But I also wanted to end on the importance of these relationships, the importance of the partnership that happens between public and private sectors. Hopefully, if you walk away with anything today, you walk away understanding that what we do in retail has a huge impact in the community, and what the law enforcement does every day, putting their lives on the line to protect our communities, protect us, has a huge impact on us in retail and obviously to the communities that they serve. And hopefully when you walk away today, you'll exchange your card with a law enforcement officer, you'll appreciate what they do for us and vice versa, and we can both work together to better approach the crime issue, which I think LAPD is doing a great job by organizing this. And there are a lot of police departments. I spoke at Riverside Police Department, I spoke in San Diego Police Department. There are a lot of other police departments in Southern California. I will tell you that traveling the US doing this issue, having traveled in Europe doing the same type discussion, even in Asia. Right now, Southern Cal is on top or something. The turnouts I'm seeing at the Southern California stuff, even Northern Cal, which is starting to catch up, are phenomenal. So it just says a lot about the public-private relationships in the two. So I wanted to leave you with something. Last thing that I experienced in public-private partnerships. Is Dan Cruz in here? Okay, so, well, I see Will, who worked at Nike. I worked at Nike, and we were dealing with the time, I can say this, I don't work there anymore. We were dealing at the time with protests. Protest was a huge issue for us. And what had happened was in this scenario, the unions had targeted us for hitting us for protests. And they were going across the nation hitting stores on protests. And I had a scenario in which they were going to hit, literally traveling the country, they were hitting a lot of other spots in between New York, Chicago, LA were the targets. When we first got hit in New York, we didn't see it coming. We didn't know we were going to get hit by protests. But long story short, it became what was effectively almost a brawl in the store. It got pretty bad between the protesters and us because we weren't properly prepared. We hadn't partnered with law enforcement. We didn't know how to respond. We weren't properly prepared. Chicago, we went to the police department trying to share with them what the problem risk was. And I mentioned Dan Cruz because he was the LP manager at the time. He now works for Louis Vuitton. He was the LP manager at the time in our Chicago store. And we had a scenario where literally we had a couple of thousand people protesting us outside, swinging a police van. The protest had got so bad. Now I'm going to give a little kudos out here. The next spot they were going to hit was actually coming in. It was the Nike Town in Beverly Hills on Rodale Drive. We partnered with the Beverly Hills PD, partnered with the organization there, walked them through what we had experienced, what we had seen, the pattern that we were noticing, and we prepared ourselves and them better for what we needed to do. They knew that once they saw the video, we showed them the video of what had happened in Chicago, we showed them the video of what had happened in New York. Long story short, that same group had zero impact on us from a business standpoint. No employees were put at risk, no law enforcement was put in risk. It was handled perfectly. The difference, the only difference, was our ability to better partner with law enforcement, A, communicating to them what the risk was, and then having them partner with us on what the remediation, what the fix would be in place. So the last thing I wanted to show you is a little, you know, we've been talking a lot about ORC. I want to talk a little bit about event planning. You know, many of you guys heard 2 years ago that an employee was killed in a stampede on Black Friday. Great example of planning. And I said, we've all made mistakes in this industry, so I'm not picking the retailer that went through that, because Lord knows I've come close to, unfortunately, having something like that happen. But what I wanted to show you was what can happen when things go well in event management, what can't. It's a great example of partnership, a little deviation from what you guys have been talking about all day, ORC, and then we can open it up for questions. Quick piece of trivia, it's always good to share things like this. The term Black Friday sometimes gets a negative connotation. It's actually a positive connotation. Companies would write their accounting books in red when they were not profitable. When you got to the day after Thanksgiving, that's when most retailers turned to profitable. So you would then turn to writing it in black. Black then became a, representing that you were now making money from losing money. You were now profitable. So it's actually a positive term. That's where the term Black Friday comes from. So I just want to say, hey, thank you. I appreciate you guys being here today. I appreciate you guys being here for the presentation. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you guys coming.